Okay, it's 11:30. We'll get the meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Alcohol and Drug Abuse started. Can we begin with introductions at the front table?
Jamie Hines, business license official with the clerk's office.
Amanda Moser, clerk's office.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Bill Evans.
Elby Gray Jackson.
And if you wouldn't mind in the audience just letting us know who you are.
Christopher Constant with Fairview Community Council, also with Fairview Business Association, and I work for
Jerry Jenkins, Anchorage Community Services.
Sherry Porter, Salvation Army Coast Road.
Carmen Springer, English Coalition at Wilson.
Terry Shubin, housing supervisor for Homework Bound.
Dr. Brooks, Rural Cap.
John Rudowski, Fire Department.
No, Sullivan, English Fire Department.
Eric Shulman, Purpose. Joel Catterer, Prison Corporation. Warren Jones, Covenant Church, APAC.
Jan Jones, Covenant Church, Baker. Kaylee Healthy, intern master of social work student with the Senior Disability Services.
Hi, Joseph Strang, master's student with the social work program.
Steve Ashman, Anchorage Department of Health and Human Services.
Legal assistant Rosella Young in the Assembly Council office.
Sylvia Dolomidis, Alaska Hospitality Retailers and Artwork.
Mary Beth Grable, Catholic Social Services.
Lisa Gino, Catholic Social Services.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. The focus of today's meeting is going to be centered on efforts in the Fairview neighborhood. Many of you probably have seen it within the past month. There have been, I guess, what you can call a bit of a crackdown by APD on some of the activities in Fairview. And so we kind of gathered today some representatives from the Fairview neighborhood as well as from our municipal law department and the police department to talk about the issues that are going on in Fairview and perhaps some of the other things that can be done to help the situation in that area. So our first presenter today is from the Fairview Community Council, and a well-known face at our meetings here is Chris Constant. So Chris, take it away.
So, good morning. Some of this will be rehashed for you, Mr. Evans, Chairman Evans, because I did a talk recently at the State of Our City, and I think an important part of this discussion is a little bit of history of what's going on. So, back before we had the borough government, united with the municipality, and in fact, just around the time the state that Fairview as a neighborhood was actually a separate community. And it desired, like many communities, to stay a separate community, but the city of Anchorage didn't want that to be so. And so there was an annexation process that happened, and the Fairview community resisted that process through the courts and lost all the way to the Supreme Court. And at the time that happened, one of the members of the city council offhandedly said that they were deliberating where to put the highway. Where should we put that Seward and Glen Highway? And the city council at the time, some say in a matter of revenge because of the length of the process as it had occurred, said, well, we're going to, and said this on the record, we're going to put the road through Fairview because that place is never going to amount to much. And so the reason it's never going to amount to much back then, this was a neighborhood in this town which people had accepted that there was a red line district around this neighborhood. If you know your civil rights history, a red line district is a neighborhood in which bankers made clear decisions on behalf of their communities that was the only place that we would let black people buy property. We would only provide them with mortgages there. Because it's far enough away, it's not going to bother us, that's where they live. And so that process broke down because of the Civil Rights Act and because, our emerging consciousness that we needed to have a more equal society. And so that formal red line disappeared. But something occurred in its place that has a lot of us starting to realize that the red line never went anywhere. It's just that the population segregated into that neighborhood, instead of being based on a racial perspective, is based on an economic perspective and is a place of concentration of social troubles. Let's put our troubles over there because then we don't have to deal with them over here. That's effectively what we're witnessing in the Fairview neighborhood. And those troubles, you know, we have the jail, we have the homeless shelter, we have the sleep off, we have several mental health serving facilities who are dealing with the people who are circulating through that place. And then we have all of this mob of people who are actually sleeping on the streets in our neighborhood. And so that really worked for Anchorage for a long time. But then there's something that's changed in the recent years. And that change is, whether it's because of economic challenges, policy decisions, or whatever, the amount of people who are concentrated in that small section of our town is now no longer able to be kept in that part of town. The problems are now generalizing to the rest of our community. Anywhere that essentially has a transit system, a grocery store, a liquor store, a place where people can hang out. This population is now seen on the streets from the heart of Fairview, the most concentrated, all the way out to South Anchorage and even in Eagle River. You hear these stories. So that's actually a good thing, because no longer can the city afford, nor can it stay comfortable in denial that the problem is okay, because there are literally people rotting on our streets because of policy decisions. And Fairview, some years ago, saw this problem and started to organize, because it's no longer just down off the bluff, it's in our parks, and these are real people who have real lives and real human stories and real human suffering, but their suffering is now at our door. So like this winter, 2 incidents I'll remark about. One, someone decided they needed to use the bathroom, and there was no place for them to go, so they pooped on my neighbor's wall right at the coldest, darkest of winter. There's no way to get rid of that. So there's, just now, finally, it's warm enough to remove. Been human waste sitting there. And on that subject, this is just a baffling experience that happened, and thankfully we've managed to kind of figure this communication out. A business owner in the neighborhood had problems because there was like 10 different piles of human waste on her business property. She's down at basically 3rd and Carluck, or no, 4th and Carluck, just off the bluff down there. And so she called the health department. The health department said, we can't really help you here. Call the planning department, code enforcement. They called code enforcement. Code enforcement said, call the mayor's office. The mayor's office said, call the Fairview Business Association. A voluntary group of neighbors and businesses working together to try to fix the problem. Well, who went out there and took pictures? Wasn't somebody from the muni. Thankfully, we figured that out. It was the Fairview Business Association that went out and took pictures and started raising heck about this. You know, there's a disconnection there. Another incident that happened is, and this is just very personal, there's a dilapidated property 3 lots down from where I live, across the street. There was a drug bust there some years ago, and the owner got rid of it, and they tore everything down but the garage. The garage is still there. Some homeless people peeled off the walls in certain sections so they could create a place where they could go inside of this structure and have a camp. And so we noticed it. We didn't quite know what to do. And it was late one night, and I'm just walking to go to the downtown to go to an event because I live close enough. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this very scary man is standing 2 feet behind me. Came right out of the building, right out of the shadows, you know. Very scary incident. I came home from that event. The same man was rolling a cigarette two fences away from my front door. And he looks at me and says, "Are you following me?" And he comes and gets in my space. And the only way we got him to back off was calling 911. He ran away. So me and my neighbors went to someone else's property and did a little guerrilla home improvement and boarded up those holes, right? This is the conditions we're living in Fairview. I had an 8-year-old child say to my neighbor, her mom, "Mommy, why does our neighborhood have to be so scary?" Right? That's reality. It's not uncommon. Now in Fairview, we have an incredible diverse community. We have, as I mentioned in my talk the other day, 3rd-generation Alaskans go into Denali Elementary, and Sudanese children who just moved here because they were able to escape a war zone, right? This is who is living in this neighborhood, butting up against this massive user base. Some calculations put it roughly 1/3 of the beds in our neighborhood, or 1/4 of the beds in our neighborhood are institutional beds because of the jail, because of the sleep off, because of a homeless shelter because of all of this. Like, whoa, that's a huge population demographic we have to figure out what to do. So that just kind of gives you a characteristic of the problem. Now, years ago, now, it was 2007, the Fairview community organized an initiative, Chronic Public Inebriate Public Workshop and Policy Recommendations. Worked with an incredible array of the people who are now running major organizations in this town. And I don't have copies for everyone, but there are copies made available to you there. You can see who was in which sessions. You can see what was discussed, what proposals were made. And so last year, after we witnessed the legislature turn back $10 million of alcohol tax money, or not the legislature, the governor, for lack of a plan, Fairview decided it's never going to not have a plan again when it comes to these issues. And so Fairview went to Juneau last year and argued that we need funding to create a treatment program that's going to start moving these people from the streets into a better life. And using the policy recommendations that were developed in 2008, we laid out the groundwork for how that could be done. And the legislature and the governor agreed and appropriated the funds. And now the funds are soon, they've already started. There are 2 grantees that were awarded. The community has a little bit of a difference of opinion that the funds are probably not going to be used for treatment of substance use disorders, alcohol and addiction, although there will be some of those services available in a limited capacity. They're going to have 150 people that they're going to be working with, and it's quite an amazing feat. They're going to move 150 people if they achieve their goals off of the streets of Fairview into housing. And so you can't shake a stick and say that's a bad thing, but it doesn't achieve what we set out to do, which was to increase the substance use treatment services and help these people move into a different path. And so while we are grateful those funds were made available, we still see that there's a major hole that wasn't addressed. And those folks who are funded, they have a really big challenge. One of them here, I forget your name. Duncan, he's in charge of Rural Cap's project that was funded to do this. And so before you is the person hired, the first one here, to help start tackling those problems. And so, again, we aren't going to complain. We're taking 150 people off the streets with the effort of about 6 neighborhood community council volunteers, but we've got to do more. And that's kind of why I'm here to talk. So there are a few things that are pretty much no-brainers that the city's got to figure out. The first thing is, I put an article in your packet from Portland in the Pearl District. We like to laugh about Fairview. Fairview is the Pearl of Anchorage, right? And the Pearl District in Portland is a neighborhood that suffers much like Fairview does, but they figured it out. And they've changed the dynamics in their town, and they've gotten a better situation going. And one of the things that they did was they put in toilets. This is a basic human need. And that people are going to the bathroom outside is generally a sign that we aren't meeting basic human needs. As my friend who called the city, who called all the different offices and then called me, said, ancient Rome figured out how to move human waste out of their cities. We've got to be able to do this. This is not new. Right? So that's one very clear and simple thing that the Assembly can look at and say, how do we deal with this problem? Let's figure out a place for these 1,000 people or more to have to go safely to the bathroom. In Portland, they manufactured the bathrooms so they aren't these big concrete structures that are terrifying to go into. They actually have some kind of a slat work, so you can't see any business going on, but you can see if someone's in there and you can see if things aren't, appropriate. So they really thought that through. There are ways it could be done. That's one important element. A pretty common sense element, we think, that is that if, in fact, emergency services' #1 point of call is around the Brother Francis shelter and that location, that address, then it doesn't hurt to figure out, put a plan together to host some kind of a medical service triage unit there. Stop the calls from having to come in that don't have to come in, and eliminate the burdens of the most used facilities so that when emergency service is called, it's truly an emergency, so that when there is an emergency, APD can respond instead of having to stand with someone who's in a man down call, who isn't really a man down, but they have to be there because that's the rule, that's the law. Let's come up with the triage method, right? That's pretty straightforward. I think that to go with that, an additional element that would be smart, and this is something that the community council hasn't taken up yet, but we've talked about at length, is the concept that Arbor put together some years ago, although we don't agree with the location, and that's to come up with some kind of a spirit camp, tent city, a place that people can legally, safely be outside, because they're choosing to be outside, many of them. There's a whole segment of our population who don't want to go into shelter, into housing. They want to be outside, but it's illegal for them to do that anywhere in the municipality. So let's create a place that has toilets and a place to do laundry and a shower and basic facilities, and that they can be in a safe manner, managed some way. God knows I understand there's liability. That's why we have the legal folks. Figure it out. And I put in your packet, there is a property that's for sale, and that is the Oliva property, the Grub Stake property. It's 3 lots. One thing that the community is going to resist is any effort to put more addiction-based services in the neighborhood around the bluff, or homeless services, really. At some point, you got to say enough is enough. So when you look at the Native Hospital site, that really wonderful property that's there, the community would like to see something like senior housing or some other user group that isn't going to be dependent upon the services of the homeless shelter to go into that lot, because that lot is big enough that you could actually make a dent in some housing issues in this town. But we would prefer that not to be dedicated to homeless services, because at some point we have to figure out a different solution. It can't be more. Otherwise we cede that whole part of town to this negative externality that continues to grow. We have to come up. But if you look down the bluff, right next to the shelter, there is 150,000 square feet that could be cleared. And it's the only privately held property left down there. And that property, if you followed the Board of Equalization, has had its value stripped away every year because of the harmful impacts of that huge volume of people all around there. Now, I've managed to take a few of our candidates for mayor on tours of the neighborhood, because I think they need to see it. And I would love to take y'all down on a tour of the neighborhood so you can see it. Without the prep, surprise tour, let's go on Tuesday at 4. So it's not all groomed and made. So it's real. And I walked in, and Kenny was down there, and we had Mr. Berkowitz down there, and this woman made him cry. She's sitting in her wheelchair, and it smells like a dump on the street between 3rd and 4th. It smells rotten, you know? And it's amazing that our city has come to conclude that that is an okay way for our city to conduct its business, that we can have people on the street rotting. This is mind-blowing, that this is how it is, and that this is acceptable. And so we would like to see a little more order applied down there, but that property is ideal in that it is connected to the shelter. It could be opened up, cleaned up, and put infrastructure on that site, and it doesn't then start taking over more property that could be used for higher purposes through the neighborhood. Another thing that I put in front of you from the Fairview Business Association is the idea to create a social enterprise, personal responsibility job training program. Let's figure out a way to help these folks who are long-term chronic inebriated, out of the job force, probably never going to go to a 9-to-5 job in their life. Let's come up with a way to help them become employable in some way. A vocational training program. This is something that would go a very long way to helping people move away from homelessness if they can be given some opportunity to make a living and have a way of using their time that is beneficial to their spiritual and human and basic need growth. So that's before you know. Now, there's one project that, and I didn't print it out because I just didn't have time. The Fairview Community Council has had trouble working with a group called the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority in the past. We found ourselves at loggerheads with them over several cases. In fact, I was in this room when one of the primary representatives of that organization called me and my peers in Fairview murderers because we didn't support the Carlick Manor project as proposed. And in fact, the same person came after our jobs, tried to get us fired, all this very, weird and dramatic stuff. 3 times they tried to get me fired, and 3 times failed. So, needless to say, we've had our challenges working with them. Now, the first step to building trust is to actually come up with something you can work together on. And so one thing that we have decided we're going to work together on is to try to move the Alaska Consumer Web Inc., which is it's a clubhouse for the mentally ill that operates at the corner of 13th and Gamble on the northwest corner, to move them into a new facility. The problem with them being located there is that those individuals who are sober, you can't be in there and be drunk. It's not like they are the people you see on the street. They're actually trying to make good with their lives in there, but they're perceived by the 25,000 car trips per day that go through the corner of 13th and Gamble, because their sign is there as the genesis of that problem, right? And so they're smeared. It's bad for them to be at that location. It's bad for our community to have them there. And so we would like to work with the trust, and it might take some municipal land or municipal investment to come up with a plan to move them. And the agreement that we have tentatively with the trust representatives is that the housing, it would be a new building with their clubhouse on the bottom and some housing above it. Would be sober housing, which is, because we've invested substantially into wet housing, into the Housing First model, we do need to invest in other models parallel at the same time. You know, when the Mental Health Trust had their consultants here, their advice to you was, at some point you're just going to have to do it. It doesn't matter what your constituents say. I don't know if you remember that, but they said that. And I'm here to say, we are your constituents. Please listen to us. We have wisdom that your outside consultants who are brought up to tell the story of one perspective don't have. And so don't steamroll us. Have us in the conversation, because we have more perspective than any outside group can have on these matters. You know, don't take their advice, is my recommendation. Because who do you work for? You know, this outside consultant groups and the state authorities, or the people who put you in office. This is a very important concern. And of course, we advocate for finding solutions to reduce the suffering of all of the populations in our town. But it can't all be in one neighborhood, and it can't all be one type of service. I also put in front of you a letter from my employer, so I'll be really clear. I am paid to work for these guys. I'm not here representing them, right? But still, there are 20 empty beds at Aquila House that the state doesn't fund. And so that's 20 residential long-term treatment beds that could be utilized in a comprehensive initiative to help move people into a healthier lifestyle. So I want that to be included on the record. Now, the most radical of proposals, I don't have any information on. One of them is not, again, sanctioned by the council, but it is a discussion that the council has begun having. One thought to eliminate some of the impacts of this population is perhaps we come up with a new model for a liquor store, something like they do at Fort Yukon, which is a government-run or a nonprofit-run liquor store that provides a limited stock of beverages that's ideally operated by a current and very highly performing package store operator on a contract basis, not as one of their stores, but that would sell to these individuals and ideally would be staffed by interns from a social work program like UAA, where every point of sale could be an opportunity for helping to move these people towards a better life, sober choices, and every dime that is invested in their purchases of alcohol could be turned around into an investment in treatment and support services instead of profits shipped off to Canada or Washington. We could do this. It's kind of radical though. And so, but it's worth putting on the table for consideration. Another issue, I don't know if you remember when there was a fire chief that came before you and at the last minute he was asked not to speak. I don't know if you remember what he was, do you remember what he was here to talk about? Did you ever get that info?
No.
So the community council with the business association would like to see the city government come up with a process to restrict the sales to the worst offenders of alcohol code in the city. Now, we're not proposing to create a criminalization of being alcohol or of having alcohol. We don't want to see a system that's done. But I know that the emergency services had done some work at the direction of the mayor to come up with how that could be done in a legal and ethical way, and in a way that works. And so I would task this group to task the mayor to bring forward at least the proposal so that you can have a chance to review it. Because there is a way that it can be done, and it can be done so that it's respectful of everybody's civil rights, so that it doesn't create legal consequences, but that it gives the people who are trying to help these individuals a way to move them towards making better decisions. So,
I have a question.
Chris, hang on, Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe you talked about it because I drifted for a minute. But you asked us if we remember the gentleman from the fire department who was about to give us a presentation and then he was stopped by the municipal attorney. Okay. And so, do you have any idea what he was going to say?
yes,
Could
and I
you
did.
tell us?
Yeah, there is an effort spurred by the community and with substantial effort by the department to come up with a process to create a no-buy list, a way to restrict purchases to certain individuals so that we can reduce their impacts on the community and to themselves. And so I know for a fact that there has been substantive work, and I think the only way that this body will see it fairly is if the mayor brings it forward. And I think challenging him to do so would be a positive if he would do it. I can't say why they stopped it other than it's an idea fraught with peril, but it has been done before. And the best model that we had seen was out of Green Bay. And they did it, and they were able to reduce their impacts by 80%. Now, the Green Bay project was much smaller in scale. It was only 10 by 10 blocks. We have a whole city we have to deal with. One of the commitments the Community Council came up with in its efforts to come up with solutions this time was that we will not create a solution that merely displaces this population, because for 40 years, we've been using this model where let's get tighter here, and then they squeeze out over to Mountain View. Mountain View gets tighter over there, they squeeze over to Fairview. Fairview gets tighter, they move over to Midtown, right? We need a broad solution that brings down the issues citywide, because we don't want to be the beneficiaries of a resolution that creates more problems for someone else, right? We won't be done with this until we figure out something that works for everybody.
Thanks. Mr. Training has a question.
Chris, there's not gonna be a change until we have a change in administration.
Yes.
Okay. The same forces that stopped the gentleman from talking to us are still in effect until new mayor takes over, new people get appointed.
Yep, July 1st.
So that's what we're dealing with.
I understand that, but at least now, before you understand what the matter was. And,
I think we understood the matter at the time, Chris.
okay. Well,
Thank you.
yeah, so in whole, as a broader picture, the assembly, this body is paying attention, which to me is an incredibly good sign that the denial is breaking up, that spring is coming in Fairview, that we're gonna see something, right? It might not be till after July 1. It might be that there are some things we can start now. We have a broad array of opportunities. We now know that there's a $4 million to $6 million, remainder in our budget, and so I'm not suggesting all of those funds be spent that way, but that maybe let's do something with a portion of those funds. Let's do something let's have Anchorage step up and match the state and say, look, we see what you did, here's our piece, and now what more can we do, right? Let's be a little aggressive with our thinking. I also heard reports that the mayor's office is considering an investment in the Schick-Shadel treatment method, and I would suggest it would be wise of the municipality to really consider deeply before buying some outside packaged gimmick treatment model. There are local options and other best practices that can be implemented that would probably work better with this population. The Schick-Shadel model works really well for executives and people who can get better in 6 days. But people who have spent 30 years drinking 30 beers a day, a 7-day treatment model is probably not going to work. So I think I probably used up my time, and I want to say thank you, because Fairview has seen its neighborhood plan adopted. Fairview has seen investment in its roads, and hopefully we'll see some development. The goals of the neighborhood are to see a safe and healthy place for the kids and our neighbors to be able to be neighborly, and we aren't going to get there until this issue begins to move in some positive direction. This, I believe, is the one anchor holding us into the negative. This, like the tax abatement zone that's been created, once we finally get it regulated and operating, it will prove beneficial, but not until investors see that this problem has some ray of light at the end of the tunnel. So, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris. Ms. Ray Jackson had a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very, very good. And, you know, a lot of us, because we don't live in Fairview, have no idea what you're going through, you know. And I appreciate hearing the different experiences. Not that I've heard, this is the first time I've heard it, but it's really bad. And part of the mission of this committee is to also find funding sources. And as far as I'm concerned, this proposal that the Fairview Business Association has brought forward, I want to move on this. And the way I want to do it is with the surplus from 2014. And I'll tell you something, okay? I don't care what anybody says, $4 to $6 million, but my prediction is it's going to be more, closer to 10, maybe even more than 10. And if we can't use some of that money to get something started, to make things better in our community, then there's a problem. And I'm going to advocate for this project using some of that money, and I hope that I have support from my colleagues so that we can get this budget amendment passed.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Chairman.
if you think about it, that particular investment is an investment in helping people becoming self-sustaining. You know, finding ways to help them get past this point in their lives where they're at zero state, and helping them to help themselves. And so that's a wise investment from whatever economic or social background you come from, politically speaking. And one more thing, this committee could be helpful in shaping solutions that are bipartisan, that come from both perspectives, because that is the one thing that we have found is our success, is that our approach is really from all sides.
Thanks, Chris. Mr. Peterson had a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, now, I noticed you included this advertisement of the old Grub Steak auction house that's for sale. Are you advocating or suggesting that the municipality buy this and build some sort of treatment center or housing center?
Not a treatment center, a tent city. You know, Arbor came up with a concept to create a tent city about 6 or 7 years ago. And it's a reasonable proposal. However, the problem the community would have with it is the location. It puts it up in the old Native Hospital site. They're planned. And that site, I think, is too high value to cede more substantive community lands to this issue. And so let's instead think down by the shelter. There's the last private property is right there. That's the place to do it. And he has consistently shown the harm of this overwhelming process. You know, the city has had to reduce his taxes because he's stuck there. He can't sell the place because of the neighbor. And it's no fault of the neighbor. It's the volume of need, right? And so please don't consider putting it up on the bluff, because we want to see some other use. Senior housing, you know, housing for families, not for substance use related services in that site, because we need to start changing the mix in the neighborhood. We can't handle any more of that specific population. But a tent city down below, a place that's legal for people to be, that's safe and regulated, that has basic health facilities, a place to go to the bathroom, a place to wash, a place to do laundry, you know, a place to go get a Band-Aid if you need. That kind of a thing is wise down there.
I see. Okay, follow up. And I remember that the Fairview Business Association had come up with an idea of creating a no-sale list to regulars at the liquor stores in your area.
Yep.
Are you continuing to follow up with that idea, or?
Yes, no, and I had mentioned that no buy list is what the current term has been, not no sale, it's no buy. But because then that puts the onus on the individual, not the store. It's kind of a, you know, a issue of who are we talking about. But that's what I was mentioning. The mayor has a plan. The mayor is not comfortable with the plan yet. And so if this body could make him comfortable enough at least to get a draft of it out, that would be helpful for you to understand the mechanics of how it would work. So yes, the Fairview Business Association and the Community Council are in support of coming up with a method that's not a violation of anyone's civil rights, and that is effectively targeting one last point. This will wrap it up nice and tidy, I think, in terms of the no-buy list. We had last year, about 18 months ago, about 12 members of the community come forward, essentially with pitchforks and torches. Shut down those liquor stores. They're the problem, right? Shut them down. And they were mad. And the council, instead of knee-jerk reacting, voting to shut them down, said, they're members of our neighborhood. Let's try to work with them and improve the quality of the operations. And so we had both of the liquor stores in our neighborhood working towards a goal of improving their operations. And so the Oak and Keg actually did. I have reports from all over the place. Wow, I actually saw them not sell to a drunk person. They have 2 security guards that work the property now, 2 staff in the building. They actually are working with us. The other liquor store, which will be before you, the question of shall we continue their conditional use, theirs wasn't. They didn't do any improvements. They couldn't for whatever reason, right? And for many reasons. Everyone has a reason. They didn't. And so we have to come up with a solution that the council's position then was, we don't want a solution that's going to infringe on 8,000 people's rights. And that solution, close down the liquor stores, would have infringed on everybody's right to go walk to the liquor store and buy a beer. Right? Our neighborhood's the most pedestrian neighborhood in town. We have poor people that can't really afford. They ride the bus to work and back. If they want a beer, is it fair to send them all the way to the Sears Mall? You know, that's not really fair. And so we wanted an approach that targeted the people who are actually the problem. That's where this no buy list concept came from in our research and what they had done in Green Bay. And so the same issue for the liquor stores and the no buy list. We need a solution that targets only the narrowest possible scope of people to get us to a solution. Because it's just not fair that everyone across town or in our neighborhood has to pay for the problems of a handful of people who are suffering under this illness.
Mr. Training at the plate.
Did you talk to Pat Flynn, Zed's Fairview, about this issue?
At length. Yeah, at length.
Has he said what he wants to do relative to your area?
Which part?
Any part of it?
He's behind everything that we've put forward, and he's been as effective as anyone could be expected to be. You know, we've been pretty grateful that there have been other members of the assembly who are willing to work with him, because we're at the single member district.
I know.
You know, we're at a bit of a disadvantage relative to the rest of town because we don't have a mover and a seconder of any initiative. We just have a mover, and we depend upon the will of another neighborhood's representative to stand with us. And so Patrick's been helpful on the transit issues. Patrick is helping with the liquor store. You know, he's been very clearly communicating with us. So,
Okay.
yes.
I just wanted to know, because we're there to second him if he wants to bring it forward.
And so,
As we were when Alan Tisch was on this, let me represent that area.
right.
His issues haven't gone away since Alan's time.
And they've been around for 40 plus years.
I know.
Yeah. But we're going to get there.
Any other questions? Thanks, Chris. I appreciate all the effort you put into this, not only today, but through all of our meetings and everything you do as a pure volunteer to help the situation in Fairview. It is noticed and it is appreciated. And I do specifically appreciate you coming up with a list of specific things that can be done.
I'll send you an email with the list broken down. So
That'd be even more helpful. I do want to note that I, with a lot of things you said, I from the beginning of this committee, it has been the philosophy that, you know, we were not just another committee that was going to study this issue, create a report and put it in the file, and no action would follow, which has been too often the case on this issue. And to do that, I think was recognized very early that it's going to take an effort from a number of different fronts, addressing this issue in a number of different ways, not one big fix. And most importantly, it's going to take people from various political persuasions and various other aspects of our community. And I think that's the key to getting anything done, is we have to recognize this as a community problem, and it's not a liberal problem, it's not a conservative problem, it's none of that. So I think it's very important as this committee goes forward that we don't try to assign, villains to this and to say that, well, if it wasn't for this group or this person, things would get done. This problem's been going around for 40 years. There have been a lot of people in and out of the problem, and things didn't get done. So I think I just want to remind everybody that we're all in it together, and that we can't point fingers at anyone as to be the culprit in this. So, thanks.
Thank you. I have hope.
Thanks, Chris. And our next speaker is actually going to be our next two speakers. We got word after we started that unfortunately Lieutenant Gillum from the APD is not able to make it. He's been very generous with us with his time at other meetings, so we completely understand his inability to make it today. But I understand that Mr. Sherwood will do an able job of representing the municipal law department, as well as giving us some of the information that the lieutenant would have provided as well. So it's all yours, Todd.
Hopefully so. Thank you, Mr. Evans. And it is basically, we're going to talk about the same thing, and it concerns, well, several things. The 3rd and Carluck area and the Safe Sidewalk Initiative that the mayor began some years ago. I want to give you a little bit of background and history on that, because there was an ordinance passed that essentially said you can't sit or lie on a sidewalk, public sidewalk, with certain exceptions. I've done a lot of work on a lot of legal research. I continue to, there was a legal challenge locally. I'll talk about that a little more. I continue to follow this through Google News alerts, because it's an issue in other communities, some old, some new. So anyway, going back, there was a ACLU sponsored challenge. They challenged both our parts of our panhandling statute, our ordinance, and they challenged the what is called the no sit lie ordinance. That's kind of the shorthand across the country. They challenged them on constitutional grounds. It went back and forth over a period of probably 2 years in local court. There was a final decision in Superior Court late last fall, I think in November. Basically, the outcome was we lost a portion of the panhandling ordinance, and that the part that we lost on, that the court found was not constitutional, was the part that essentially that said you can't go up to someone and say, I want money, or give me money. Because the feeling in passing that initially was that can be intimidating, it can be scary for people. Everything else about that ordinance has stayed in place, including things like you can't go up to within 20 feet, I think it is, of someone who's at an ATM machine. One of the things we're discussing, and this just shows you how technology changes things, and I picked this up from another community, but it used to be you just put a quarter in a parking meter. Now you can whip out your credit card or your ATM card and use that. So there is we're having some discussion in our office, maybe we want to expand it to include those types of things. So that's sort of the panhandling part. We prevailed on the sidewalk ordinance part. The ACLU did not appeal. The time for appeal has run. And you may recall from some of the presentations, our ordinance was based on a similar Seattle ordinance, and that withstood constitutional scrutiny at the Ninth Circuit. So we were fairly confident going into that. And in the meantime, there was another challenge very similar just in 2014 in Tempe, Arizona. That again withstood scrutiny at the Ninth Circuit. So now there's been an increasing problem. I'm going to bring up this graphic. There's been an increasing problem, and I'm getting this now. I'm kind of putting my Lieutenant Gillum hat on. But at the 3rd and Carluck area, and there's the little magenta square up there. Let me hand out some of these. I got to give credit to the police department for the graphic, because they have vast resources that the law department can only imagine to come up with this fancy, which means they got somebody that knows a little more about computer stuff than I do.
I stapled them to the back of the last hand.
Okay. And this is a copy of our existing no sit lie ordinance. So apparently there's been an increasing problem. Like I said, the magenta square is where Brother Francis Shelter and Beans Cafe are doing their good work. There's been an increasing problem with homeless people, chronic inebriates, just staying in that area, and including staying on the sidewalks, laying on the sidewalks, sleeping on the sidewalks. Now, Lieutenant Gillum tells me he has had very good conversations with both Brother Francis Shelter and Dean's Cafe about things they can do to make it less attractive, essentially, for people to be congregating and hanging out there, unless they're actually there for services, which generally occur inside the building, right? Because you're either sleeping in Brother Francis Shelter during certain hours, or you're eating at Dean's Cafe during certain hours. He reports they've been very helpful, they've been very cooperative. So now what the administration is proposing is, as you see in the ordinance, and this is in section A, the description is right at A at the very top of the page. It describes the geographical area, the downtown improvement district. That's where the sit-lie, it doesn't apply over the whole city of Anchorage. That's where the no sit-lie ordinance applies. And that's the blue area there. At the time, that was believed to be the heaviest concentration. Well, now it's apparent that there's a significant problem at the 3rd and Carluck area, but even the sidewalk back and forth to downtown and that whole area. So the proposal would be basically to just move the eastern boundary from Gamble to Orca. So basically, as an amendment, we would just be deleting Gamble Street and inserting Orca Street. And that is then the yellow area, which takes in all of the 3rd and Carluck area. And then the other recommendation would be just really in the title, instead of referencing the downtown improvement district, it would say in the downtown area. There would be
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just
Sorry.
for clarification, thank you, Mr. Sherwood. Okay, so the end of the blue line is Gamble, and the end of the yellow line is Orca.
Yes,
Okay, I just
Orca
wanted
is not a
clarification.
through
Right.
street as the yellow line makes it appear,
But,
but
yeah, I'm getting it. Thank you.
it
Thank you,
seemed to
Mr.
be the
Chairman.
best to take it in to try and find some street there.
Mhm.
Mr. Sherwood, is it required to meet constitutional muster that you identify an area that has an identified problem, or could you say that it applies everywhere in the city, that you can't?
We tried that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. That's what we lawyers always say, right? The Seattle model did it in, you might say, clusters, and I forget how many, but there may have been 6 or 7 throughout Seattle. They did not cover the entire city. Generally speaking, when you get into constitutional law issues, you need to be able to show that there's a pretty big problem for the government that impacts public safety, health, welfare before you have a restriction. And so having these concentrated areas helps do that. Now, that being said, and having studied this quite a bit, interestingly enough, San Francisco, their law covers the entire city, that entire peninsula. It has not yet been challenged. It sits in the 9th Circuit. Doesn't mean that it wouldn't be vulnerable to a challenge. And they've had theirs in place for maybe since 2010 or 2008. They had an interesting history. I actually talked to a captain of the San Francisco Police Department when we were working on ours, because originally I was going to do some training with the police. Here's how to enforce it. I got materials from San Francisco. There was a proposal there. Their city assembly or city commission, whatever they call it, supervisors, board of supervisors, turned it down. There was a public initiative, and the kind of poster child of that campaign, this is what I got from the police, was an incident in which a woman with a baby in a baby stroller tried to get by someone who was stretched completely out on the sidewalk, refused to move, got up, spit on the baby, and that was enough. And anyway, so it was a ballot initiative that passed it there. Like I said, it hasn't been challenged. More recently, in Hawaii, the city council there went through a process over about the last 9 months, and they started out saying, we're just going to have this restriction in Waikiki. Then there was a push that said we want it in Honolulu. Then the push was we want it countywide, and their county board actually controls all of that, and it's the county of the island of Oahu. And that's what they did. How successful is it? So far, it's somewhat successful in moving people out of the areas. One of the things Mr. Constant mentioned about public restrooms, that's one of the problems they've been looking at in Hawaii, in Waikiki, and so they've established a 24/7 bathroom there that has to be maintained, has to have people there 24/7. So, anyway, yes, that is one of the concerns, and so, you know, we might need to look at drawing this more narrowly, but, so this is just kind of a snapshot of what it could look like.
Sure, I think Mr. Tranian and Ms. Mosier has a question.
I tried expanding this to include Midtown, but I lost on that vote. We ended up with just this blue area, but I guarantee that if you come in for a change, again, I've got to push this to Midtown, because we're having the same problems they have here in Midtown Business District. We have sidewalks, we have people sleeping on them. I get constant complaints about it. So I'm going to try and move this down to Tudor, and the other side would probably be the new Seward Highway. For the Midtown Business District, we need to have this type of law in effect as we have down here in the blue area.
Right. And I think that's just the, you know, nobody can say for sure where's the break point, what is enough is enough, but that's the idea. And
I just want you to know that if you come back with the yellow, you
Oh,
can
yeah.
expect I'm going to try and.
it'll be amended.
Thank you, sir.
Part of the process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Mosier?
I think my question's in the, sort of the same vein through the chair. We've heard through these meetings about the area around 13th and Gamble. Did Lieutenant Gillum suggest bringing it out to that part of the Fairview area? Or he's just simply identified that magenta spot?
Well, yeah, Lieutenant Gillum and I did talk about that, and he personally would be in favor of bringing it down to 15th. Again, there you're going to bring in two major residential areas. So again, you know, then maybe you look at a narrow corridor that comes down to that area rather than taking it large. But, and it may be that just, you know, more investigation needs to be done. Is there a lot of people going back and forth in those areas? I mean, just, and again, this is a snapshot. I don't park in the parking garage. I park down on 14th and walk to City Hall. I've never seen anybody laying on the sidewalk there. I've never encountered chronic inebriates until I get to the park strip. But, you know, that's just one person's view. So it's certainly something that could be brought up.
Just, I drive home from City Hall down 9th and out on Gamble. I see a lot of what we talk about in this committee. It might be interesting to explore that.
So I think, I guess just in summary, the intention would be to bring forward this proposal, whatever form it passes, then we'll kind of go back to where we were pre-lawsuit. I'll do some training with the police, and as I recall, when this originally came forward, Chief Mew had said, you know, it's not something they expect to use a lot. It's another tool in the toolbox. It's certainly not going to solve all the problem. And I think, you know, in other discussions I've had with Ms. Freeman, again, the idea that it's a tool in the toolbox, there has to be these other services, places to go, things like that. So this is just one small part of it.
Was there anything else you had for us, Mr.
Nothing
Sherwood?
else.
Any other questions for Mr. Sherwood? I know I didn't, we gave you no heads up, but with respect to, you know, Mr. Constant's testimony, if you can talk off the top of your head about potential legal problems, the concept of like a dignity village or a tent city kind of set up in some area that's where we permit that type of camping to the exclusion of other places. Are you familiar with the legal problems or challenges associated with that?
This will definitely be off the top of my head. I am not aware, and there may well be out there, I'm not aware of any community that has done that. I can imagine, and Mr. Trini is.
Seattle, it's a place called Nicholsville.
Right.
And they took that down, now they're trying for City 3. there's another way to make it work. There's been problems because in Seattle, they tried initially having churches do it on church property. They got to the point where they couldn't get a church to accept moving it there. But you might want to look at the Seattle newspaper. They've done a lot of work in Seattle on this.
So I mean, from a liability standpoint, yes, that's there. And of course, it would be a question of, would it be a municipal project with the various liabilities that would attach to it and the cost, or would it be a private organization that gets a permit from the city? I know he talked about the need for public restroom facilities, and again, this is just based on a conversation I had with someone in our parks department. They used to have a lot more public restrooms open. They can't provide, they don't have the money to provide a 24-hour attendant / security guard, and the descriptions just defy imagination what happens with those. So they feel like their only choice is to shut them down, and so there are fewer and fewer public restrooms that are out there available in park areas. So I think those are the kinds of issues, and when you get a collection of people together like that, then there's going to be problems, there may be assaults, et cetera, unless, it's highly, highly secure. And anytime there's any problem, there is always the potential of that rolling back on the city in terms of liability. So I think if it were going to happen, it would have to be heavily staffed and heavily regulated. And there are people who could speak to this a lot better than I would, but I suspect there would continue to be numbers of people that wouldn't want to go there because it would have to be pretty well regulated and run in order to have anything, happen successfully.
Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, gosh, I don't know, building a tent city in Anchorage, we had a warm winter this year. It's not going to be this warm every year. I just can't imagine having a couple hundred people living in tents in the same area. I don't think that's putting Anchorage's best foot forward, to tell you the truth. If we're going to buy the old Grubstake auction property, maybe that's another site we want to put up another facility like the Carlick Manor, a housing first situation that maybe could hold 80 or 100 street people, because we've got about 100 that they rotate in and out of the sleep-off center every day a couple of times now. So maybe if we could get that many off the street, maybe we'd be ahead of the game for a while. I don't know, just an idea.
Any other questions for Mr. Schultz? One last ambush question for you. You don't have to answer it, but since it was brought up during Mr. Constant's testimony again, with respect to the issue of the no-buy list, that I know the legal department was kind of hesitant to come forward with that at this point. Do you know if there's been any further discussion of that? Is that something that is going to be brought forward, or do you know?
I can't say, I
don't want to get you in trouble.
I'm an assistant municipal attorney.
I'll speak a little fast. It wasn't ready for prime time when we brought it to you, so I apologize for that. We have been working on it internally in all the departments that are involved, and confident that something will be coming for us. So I think it'll be very polished. Todd's been working on it very hard, so stand by a little longer.
So,
Appreciate
now that he
it.
said that, I'll take the heat. Yeah, I've done a lot of work on it. I think it's pretty darn good. I think it would have been presented to this committee but for some very unforeseen circumstances concerning the municipal manager.
Okay.
So, I'm not a high-level administration, but it wouldn't, I don't know when you meet next, but if it's a month or so from now, I would not be surprised to see it, that you'd see me back here presenting it.
Thank you.
And it's addressed many of the problems you raised. In fact, I think it's cutting edge, and I wrote it. So.
No pride of authorship.
Chairman,
Mr. Trainee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Todd, let me ask you a question off the roster. When you were down in Colorado with marijuana, they've seen influx of kids coming into Denver. Are we you project the same problem here? with people coming in to live on the streets using marijuana rather than alcohol?
I don't know about living on the streets. I know that all the statistics we saw showed that when the legal age, well, when legal recreational marijuana came into being, then the illegal age goes down and the numbers of illegal youthful users go up. One of the most startling ones I remember seeing, and this may address your question about alcohol versus marijuana, but they showed, you might remember this slide, because they showed over a period of, I don't know, it could have been 5 to 10 years, incidents involving alcohol in the public school system. And it was pretty low, and it was kind of a flat line down here. Then they showed incidents involving marijuana in the public school district. It started out as a flat line. It kind of came up with medical marijuana. And then when medical marijuana really got going in 2000, 2009, it took another tick. And with legal recreational marijuana, it went boom. And they have had way more seizures now in the public school system. They've had more incidents of under 21 driving under the influence of marijuana. So it's hard to say what the problem will be with youth. I expect we will see more. That's why one of my kind of early recommendations, takeaway points coming back before the marijuana committee was start the education process in the school district early, and often about the real dangers of marijuana for youth. There's all kinds of research out there about how it affects brain development, for example. And by the same token, UAA, I know they have a lot of students older than 21, but I assume they're going to have a no pot on campus. Plus, they've got a lot of people 21 and under. I think they need to start a significant education campaign there too.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? One last one. With respect to it sounds like you have a proposal that you're working on to bring forward that would be essentially this.
Yes, at this point, I mean, I've got a rough draft here, but it was pretty easy because it just substituted a couple words. You know, substituted orca for gamble, for example.
Before you do that, would it be possible for you to talk with Mr. Trainee and with Lieutenant Gillum with respect to the adding Midtown to it and adding the extension further south to 13th or so? I think that'd be a lot better process if it's included in the original instead of having Mr. Trainee try to add an amendment later where we don't have the sort of the background for it. So
And just to be clear, and maybe the way to go at this, the administration's concern based on our advice was whether constitutionally it would be sustainable to draw that line. And so, like I said, maybe a narrower corridor. Maybe part of it is you just want to get the boundaries too complex too, because there's something to be said for simplicity. But so maybe we could even do it, you know, 2 versions and have them both ready.
That would be nice, Todd. Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Glad to work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Sam? Thank you, Mr. Sherwood. Appreciate the update. Okay, so with the absence of Lieutenant Gillum, we are at the point of member comments. So let's begin with you, Mr. Peterson.
Well, I was just happened to think about something that a young person told me a few years ago when I was out campaigning door to door. I came across one of my former Little Leaguers who, when I knocked on the door, I saw this 6'2" gentleman, and he immediately called me Coach Pete. And of course, I didn't recognize him because he was twice the size as he'd been when I was coaching him a few years earlier. And so we talked for a minute. I found out that he was over 18 and registered to vote. And so I said, well, so, talk to me about an issue. What's an issue you think I need to know about? He said, I'm glad you came around. He says, because when they changed the cigarette law to make it more difficult to buy cigarettes and removed cigarette machines, he said, I noticed the kids in school, it was harder for them to get cigarettes, so they all switched to weed. And so now that weed is going to be more controlled, hopefully, if we can eliminate at least some of the underground black market, I think there might actually be more difficult for some of the teenagers to get marijuana, just like it's been more difficult for some of them to get cigarettes. Just my perspective.
Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, Todd, and also the one from Chris. I don't know if he's still here, but it was really, really good. And I just want to bring up the fact that I mentioned bringing forward this the Fairview Business Association's proposal during first quarter budget revisions. Mr. Train and I are going to have a conversation with Mr. Flynn, because this is his district, before we do that, and hopefully he'll be on board with us. But we will be having a conversation with Mr. Flynn on this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And if you could include me in that, I wouldn't, well, I guess you wouldn't have a problem including, if we get too many people in.
No, we can
But if you
post
keep me,
it.
keep me informed, I'd like to be,
Absolutely.
have some input on that. Mr. Trainee?
Nothing, sir.
Now we're at audience participation. So actually, the fire department, you were kind enough, we asked the fire department to have some representatives here because we knew some of these issues, they may have questions or may involve questions to the fire department. Do you guys have anything you want to add to what you've heard so far?
No, sir. No, it's, in terms of the third and Carlock, even I looked at our responses for this year. It's kind of tough to determine whether it's, the population moving to and from one needs and other transits. But just here today, we had 11 calls specifically at that address. One is a transport, and it's public use.
One of the other comments that was raised by Mr. Constant was the issue of setting up some sort of triage medical presence at the, sort of the campus area there. And I know from one of our earliest meetings, I think Deputy Chief had mentioned that the community paramedic kind of issue that has been at least discussed at the fire department. And to the extent you have any kind of thoughts about that, you don't have to have it off the top of your head, but would certainly be interested in hearing about possible options for that.
Yeah, and Linda, I don't know if we've talked about it, maybe we just got briefed in some of our meetings, but actually looking at more of a mid-level practitioner, like either physician assistants or nurse practitioner that can be available down there would be very beneficial.
Okay.
Just the community paramedic model is rather new in this country, so it's pretty, where it's active, the states are kind of run differently, and there's nothing specific in Alaska at this point. So having that mid-level medical practitioner would be the best way to go.
Thank you, appreciate it. Well, let's open it up for any audience comments, questions, statements, complaints. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. I had some chance over the last couple of months to hang out down at Carlock and Third, and I was on vacation when they closed down those who were down on the camp there, along on the private park property there, and I wasn't sure where the order came from. I guess I was just wondering if social services had gone out there before it was shut down. And if they were, the week before I left town, there was 15, 20 people there. Nice people there. On the other side, not so nice people that were selling drugs. But there's a few there that I was concerned that they didn't have a place to go, and some of them in wheelchairs, and they didn't know if they had social services that went down there before we closed it down. And I was concerned about that.
Don't know the answer, but if anybody has any information for Mr. Peterson.
I'm Terry Chubin. I'm the housing supervisor for Homeward Bound, which has an outreach component. And we had a previous grant that it's going to be Duncan's will be modeled kind of sort of around it. And we did go down. We have offered the men and women who are in the wheelchairs assisted living to help them facilitate that. To also do the outreach of we'll help you do the paperwork, we'll help you get the funding, we'll locate the home, we'll do all this stuff for you. But at the end of the day, they said no. And we just kept, all we can do is say, you know what, here's our business cards, talk to Becky at these, she knows where we're at, we'll keep coming and we'll keep coming and we'll keep coming. And we do a lot of outreach down there. We do nothing but just give out socks so people know what our faces look like. And we were there, and the next thing we knew, they were gone too. And then they went up on the bluff by the ANS, and then they were gone there too. So, and they are spreading out around town. So we do concentrate when aggressive outreach going out into the camps, going to the panhandlers and offering services. Some take them, some don't. So an APD is, the CAP team is really, really good about making referrals. Because of the CAP team, one gentleman who was in Sitka Park for 13 years is now housed and wants to stay housed because he asked for cable. So I knew that was good. His barrier was the language barrier. He only spoke Spanish. So, and then the other woman, they actually saved her life. She was in a camp off of Arctic behind, there's a large church there. And they did the camp abatement, and then they went back to check with DNR because they're going to clean out the property. And it was icy. She had a dog, God rest him, named Bolt. And he's a pit bull. And we all know law enforcement are not very keen on pits, but to see two huge CAP team members give him a milk bone, that's how nice this dog was. They went in there, and she had not left the camp because it was so icy for 5 days. The dog was digging at the ground trying to eat plastic because it was so hungry. The CAP team made arrangements for transportation. They called me, made transportation to Brother Francis so I could put her in their program in a single room, and they made arrangements to have the dog taken to animal control. And today, that woman is actually in transitional housing at Merrill, doing quite well. So if it wasn't for the CAP team and the outreach that we do and working with them, you know, the male that was in Sitka Park, he didn't have a camp, he had a homestead. I actually have pictures where it was a pitched roof. Melinda saw the pictures. It was kind of like, we all just went out there just to see what it looked like. So that's the kind of stuff that we do at Rural CAP. And it's about being out there and hiking 5 miles back on Tozer Track and seeing if you can help someone. And because of the CAP team, we've been able to be connected with some of the hardcore campers. And some of them, you know, there was 4 referrals yesterday and 2, you know, are coming in. We're trying to get this other pair coming, you know, to get out of the camp into transitional housing. So there are a lot of services that are being offered and a lot of outreach that's going on. And with the CAP team, they're actually helping the community.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, and thank you for what you're doing. Anybody else? Any comments, questions? All right. No?
One last comment.
Mr. Peterson and then Mr. Peterson. Okay.
Oh. Peterson sounds like a law firm.
Or a blind store.
Sorry, I think I have like 30 seconds left or something, but I have been doing a little research on some of the systems that we've been doing with the Fairview Business Association and some of the work with the state. And I found a 6-point plan that I thought addressed several of the things that we had. And so I just wanted to mention 6 points that was done through it's called the Homeless Services 6-point strategy. It has an 18-month time frame and funding and so on. The 6 points that they use here that I think we could apply, just change a few words and apply to Fairview, is that number 1, to house the top 20 users of the system, the Rural Sleep Off Center and so on, fire department and what have you. They have a plan for that. The next one addresses housing first, to have a certain quantity of housing first that we would build. The third one is to enhance the day services. There's some issues about Beans Cafe and whether or not that draws folks there or doesn't. I looked in the 10-year plan. Beans Cafe was meant by the Downtown Business Association as a community neighborhood impact abatement effort, which was to get folks off the streets. So any effort that would affect closing that or other things or moving and so on, that the issue may go right back to the streets of downtown and so on. Right now, the fact that they're all there or hanging around there, they would be hanging out somewhere else if they weren't there. So the idea is to bring services down there. They have an estimate of about $180,000 a year that could increase services in the Carlton campus, if you will. Number 4 was the issue that Mr. Constant brought up, which is they have a whole site committee planning on where to locate services to spread them out and to look at the whole thing using the housing and neighborhood development team mission. The 5th one was the public safety effort and to try and distinguish between the drug users, the attackers, if you will, and those who are actually in need of using public safety on that in these communities so you can identify which is which. And the final one, which is very interesting and important to me, which is, and they use an interesting word here, they say animate the Fairview neighborhood, I'm using Fairview, animate the Fairview neighborhood for homeless and non-homeless individuals, making it a community event by bringing out street concerts and so on. There are things that we have, but an interesting thing of bringing all the folks been talking about a collective impact model. We may be coming up with a big plan from the top and think that we have it, but collective impact says that bring them to the table, let them tell us what they would like, and you bring from the bottom up. And so a lot of these things that we might be at the wrong end of the solution tables.
Thanks, Mr. Peterson. And if you could, if you have that as a document, if you want to send it to Amanda, she'll distribute it to the rest of us too. That'd be great. And also, I'll get to, and if you can, I see there's some new faces here today. If you want to get on our email list and there's a
Sign up sheet.
oh, there's a sign up sheet over there. Just add your email and we'll make sure you're tied in with the future meetings and what we're doing. Other Mr. Peterson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I was just wanted to tell the committee that the Northeast Community Council passed a resolution at their meeting a couple weeks ago dealing with inebriates. We have a problem in Muldoon as well. And so, I got an email from one of the members of the Community Council, and he wanted to have me provide that resolution to the members of this committee, so I'll email that to Amanda, and she can send it to all of us.
Okay. Thanks. Last call. Okay. Seeing none, our meeting's adjourned. Thank you all.